keep an eye on the chat menu and question and answers if people have any.
Perfect. Because I might it's a bit more interactive than usual, so if that's okay.
Of course. And do you need to screen share? If you do,
no.
We can do a test.
No, I don't need to screen share. No.
Okay. Well, I'll just introduce you and then the question.
Awesome.
So,
thank you.
Let's just see. We have some participants, some attendees waiting for us to start. Okay. So here we go. Let's do it. Are you ready?
Awesome. Yep, I'm ready.
All right. Well, hello everyone. Good evening or good afternoon. Don't know who's where on the planet. Welcome to Doing It Together: How to Work in the Arts and in Community from an Independent and Inclusive Lens with Rosina Kazi at the Second National Asian Heritage Symposium. So before we start, we want to acknowledge that many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to the land where you are now. You are indigenous and not indigenous to the territory where you are now. Regardless of who you are, we pay respect and recognize the original custodians of the land where we are. Out of respect for the rights of Indigenous people, it's our collective responsibility to critically interrogate the colonial histories and present-day implications of this. The work that we do on behalf of Festival Asiatique is from the perspective of honoring, protecting, and sustaining this land and its people who were first on this territory. We strive to go beyond just acknowledging the land and weave in Indigenous knowledge, share principles, and invite you to move beyond an acknowledgement and into the doing. So hi everyone again, my name is Kira Nambwani. I'm a board member of Festival Asiatique in Montreal, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator for this session and introduce you to Rosina Kazi. So Rosina is one of the silent movers and shakers of Toronto's underground art scene. And Rosina is the lead singer of the protest electronic duo Lal. Rose has been instrumental in the growth of many of the city's QT BIPOC artists and DJs, providing venues and forums for their musical expression. Rose grew up in the Canadian Bangladeshi community where politics and art went hand in hand. They grew learning traditional Bengali folk music and dance and spent many of their weekends practicing and performing at many of Toronto's high schools. This is where her passion for community and professional arts was planted. So based on her work as a musician with the electronic duo Lal and also with the DIY QT2S BIPOC and Friends art space called Unit 2, which is one of the longest running BIPOC space in Toronto. So Rosina will explore and talk to us about ways to work collaboratively in the arts by creating safer and inclusive space from a decolonial, feminist, crip, queer, trans, and anti-capitalist lens. So this will be a conversation about stories, ideas, challenges, and victories. So welcome, Rosina. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I'm just curious, am I able to see if any of the participants at all?
If you go to the participants.
Oh, the gallery view. There we go. Okay. Mm-hmm. Is it just Fran?
No, you'll just see the panelists.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay.
And then the gallery view. But if you want, we could ask to see all the participants.
Is that okay?
I could put in a request and see if Brand
happens.
Can do that.
But while we're waiting for that, I'm Rose, and as you've heard, I'm from the band Lal. It's very odd doing this without seeing or sharing with participants. So I'll do my best. Part of this is sort of an interactive workshop, and so my bad if that was confused. But basically, the work that I do with community in Toronto is based on supporting, people like to call it marginalized groups. I don't call it that because I don't believe that we're on the margins. I think we're actually probably the majority. And so it's really important for us to understand and take up space. And so that's kind of what I'm working from. And I'm not sure how to do this without seeing people.
Yeah, I've put in a request.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Okay, I'll just keep blabbing, and then I know at the end there'll be a question answer period. And also I was hoping to get some stuff in the chat. But I guess I'll just roll along. And
in the meanwhile, if there are any messages in the chat, I will relay them to you.
Okay, brilliant, brilliant. I was really curious about who's in the room. So if we're going to talk about like DIY, if we're going to talk about community, that's why it's important for me to see who's in the room. So if people could chat who you are and your pronoun, and also like why you're here, and if there's any questions that people may have, because what I do through the work that we do in Toronto, it's all collective, is that we believe that actually we do hold knowledge in our bodies and in our spirits, and it's about just pulling out that knowledge. And oftentimes, because of our experience as racialized folks, or queer and trans folks, or folks who have disabilities, or
Oh, here you go.
oh, there we go, perfect. This is great. Okay, so this is everybody. Okay, perfect.
Maybe you should. I'm gonna send everyone a message to please share video, so
yeah.
Rosina can see you guys.
and if you don't want to share video, that's totally okay too.
Oh, hi.
Like you totally don't have to share. But in the chat, if you could sort of introduce yourselves, or even if, is it possible for me to get them to introduce themselves, or do you have to turn them on and off in terms of Zoom? Can people just mute themselves or whatnot? Or in
yeah,
the
I think
chat?
so.
Yeah, okay. So in the chat, if you're able to give me your name and your pronoun, why you're here specifically, and if there's any questions that you may have, so that I have an idea of where I can go with this talk as well. Who do we have? We have Ashna, Jen, and Brand. And I guess we're a small group, I'm guessing? Mm-hmm. Yay, so I like small. Hi. So hello. Yeah,
I'm just trying everyone to unmute so they can participate in this conversation.
Yes, because it's more, I know that this is probably not, sorry for the tech stuff, but like this works much better if we're actually talking together versus like me just talking at you, if that makes sense. So who wants to go? Give me your name, your pronoun, and why you're here.
I can go. My name's Ashna. I am from Toronto. We've actually met before. I used to work at the Regent Park Film Festival. We met last year. My pronouns are she and her. And I'm here. Honestly, I just like came across this today, and I was just really interested to see how I guess people are navigating right now during COVID, and just like I work in community programming and just kind of I'm trying to see what's out there and like get ideas to be able to continue doing just to be able to continue working in community spaces and stuff. So yeah.
Okay, awesome. Does anybody want to go next?
Okay, my name, well, the spelling is Jean, but I call myself Jenny. That's what my parents have always called me. Okay, and so, nice. Yeah, and I guess my pronouns are she, her, and I've been sort of been involved with the art scene in Calgary for a while. I'm an arts reporter and writer. I have a radio show, and I write for print magazines. So, yeah.
Perfect. Okay. And is there one more person who wants to chat or tell us who they are? And
well, since I'm the only other person on this,
okay. I can go. Okay, sure. Totally, let's include you.
Okay, so my name is Kira Nambwani, she, her. I'm based in Montreal, originally from India, and I'm a freelance portrait and documentary humanitarian photographer, and I'm also on the board of Festival Asiatique. So I'm here just to help out and moderate this session.
Okay, brilliant. I was late because I couldn't actually find the link, and I was on a different link waiting.
That's all good. You're here now, so let's make the most of our time together.
Okay, so I mean, like, has anybody heard of Unit 2 or LAW or any of the work that I mentioned in the bio or anything? Have either of you heard of any of that stuff?
Yeah, both actually.
Both. So Unit 2, essentially as musicians, we've been around for like 25 years. Myself and my partner, who's West Indian, is Black identified. I'm queer identified and non-binary, and my partner is a cis straight man. We recognize that as artists of color, particularly at that time, even though we had been given a lot of support, that we hit a ceiling, and that it was very difficult to move past that ceiling, particularly because we're not capitalists, and I'm not really into the industry, I'm into an ecosystem. So many of us are sort of shunned from the industry. I found it very toxic and very violent. And I'm talking particularly the music industry. There's definitely some really good people in the arts, but there's also this really heavy underlying silent, and more we're hearing about it, toxic culture that is pervasive in the arts. And so I'm talking about homophobia, transphobia, ableism. I'm talking about gendered violence. I will let you know that we're having a DIY queer and trans skate park outside of our house. So you might hear people sort of go past me, so I apologize for the noise. So because of our experiences as QT BIPOC and BIPOC folks, I just kind of got really frustrated with trying to make it in this Canadian lens, where I didn't see myself. There was very little folks of color, and particularly queer folks or like weird folks in positions of power. And so it became very frustrating. So instead of, and then I recognized too, is that when I would go to a warehouse show, or we'd go to a warehouse show, or if we would, go to a concert or go to a workshop, or if I looked at an organization, when you look at who was running it, who was in power, it was always usually cis, straight, white people. And I don't think that's changed a lot. I think it's changing. But 25 years later, I'm like, okay, we still have an issue. The reason why we started Unit 2 was because we just became so, instead of being angry about something and frustrated, we're like, what can we do to change the spirit and create something new? So 12 years ago, we were able to find a warehouse space in Toronto. At that time, you were able to find more affordable warehouse spaces. Right now, it's almost impossible in this city. And literally, we just started with a group of friends. And we live here as well. So that actually then makes it a very different relationship, because you're actually inviting people to your home. And I think that's part of the reason why it ends up being safer for folks, because you're in someone's home. And I very much am present for a lot of the events or other people from Unit 2, so that we can monitor what's happening energetically. So yeah, so within Unit 2, what we did was, we had no idea what we were doing. Like, we were like totally like, what do we do? We just opened up this space. For me, part of the issue around, because right now we're seeing a lot of people talk about diversity and inclusion, talking about safer spaces. And so the language is there, but we're not embodying the language. And sometimes I'm even suspect of the intention. Is it something that people are just doing because we have to do it? It's the new grant language, like, what is it? But I'm not necessarily seeing it embodied in the different spaces. Like, everybody and their mom now is like basically saying that they're all these things. For me, when I look at an organization, whether it be an independent organization or whether it be an institution, I need to look at their power structure top down. So if I notice that at the board level particularly, it's still a lot of one type of person, depending on the organization, but mostly like white cis folks, we have a problem, And in a city like Toronto, and I think Calgary too is pretty diverse, there's no reason why we should have lack of representation at every level. You know what I mean? So that's how Unit 2 began. Any questions about Unit 2?
Yeah, I'm curious, how many artists in residence? Like you mentioned, you live there, so how many other artists?
So originally it would be 3 of us, so myself and Nicholas, and then we'd always have somebody who lived here. So not only were we working with different artists in community, we were providing affordable housing. But each roommate that we'd have, it would depend on how they wanted to participate with Unit 2. If they just wanted their room and help where they could, that was fine. If they wanted to get really involved in program and support, that was fine. So we've had people like Ange Loft. I'm not sure if people know. Ange Loft is a Mohawk artist who does really well, does a lot of community-based art stuff. We've had Toyin Coker, who now does a lot of permaculture stuff. Kevin Jones is a photographer that also had his photography studio here. So the intention was, like, whoever was in here, we would share the space and we'd work together. and then we would host events. And honestly, we didn't let the press know. We were very we were very careful because we wanted in our space. I wish I could show you a video. I could probably put it up somewhere as well, but like it's quite small. Like packed, it fits maybe with accessible. Like because we are accessible. We're not fully accessible in terms of having like all the ramps and having all of the bars and such. But we really did our best to make it a ground floor, the bathrooms accessible. And so when we look at access stuff, if 40 people are in the space, there's enough room for some chairs, some wheelchairs and mobility stuff. But we've also had it packed up to like 80 people for like dance parties. So it totally depended upon what we were doing in terms of that kind of stuff. But our premise has always been that we're not going to curate this space. Because for me, if I'm going to work from a decolonial lens, it's very important not to control things. I think for me, controlling something is a colonial tactic. That doesn't mean not being organized. That doesn't mean not, having, in some cases you might need hierarchy, but it is about not always trying to control everything. And so because we never really tried to control anything, and we literally said, look, come into this space, what help do you need to make the space work for you? We'll work with you to make that happen. And I think because of that, we've been able to build trust with all kinds of communities, from like Indigenous folks to Black folks to like queer and trans folks, deaf community, differently abled community, and also very many different artists. And so, and also community organized and activists. A lot of our community are activists, and many of them are watched by the police. So this became a space that people could have meetings, could organize together without necessarily being bothered by the police. There was a point to why I was talking about this, and I can't remember. But basically, Unit 2's whole vibe was like, we're not going to control anything. You're going to tell us what you need, and we're going to make that happen. And literally, that's all we did. It's a lot of work, but that's how we built trust, because we listened. A lot of different people wanted to come in and like corporatize the space or tell us, oh no, you should program it this way, or you should do this. And we're like, we never had the opportunity as artists to be welcomed into a space and just being given carte blanche. So that's what we want to provide in Toronto, and that's why I think we've lasted for 12 years. And I forgot the press piece. So the reason why we didn't want to tell press is because, unfortunately, in Toronto, because we're a small space, we couldn't take the chance of too many people showing up, A, and B, people that we didn't want showing up. Because when something becomes very cool, you tend to have a particular audience show up. And if we're doing something that's safer for queer and trans and two-spirit and BIPOC folks and friends, obviously we don't want the whole room filled with white folks. So that's kind of how that's why we didn't tell the press. Because as soon as you tell the press, in this city particularly, if they choose to do something about it, you have a whole bunch of other people coming, and that wasn't our intention, right? So that's kind of, we've been very careful around media and how we sort of work. Interestingly enough, we've just been nominated for a big community arts award from the Toronto Arts Council, which is hilarious to me because we've been trying to hide for 12 years. We've literally been hiding, and we're kind of like anarchists in a particular way. So that's Unit 2. And then we do Bricks and Glitter is a side project that came out of Unit 2, which is alternative DIY pride, more grassroots, more community-based and locally focused. It was a response to Pride, not, again, really involving our voices. And so, even with the police stuff that happened the last, 4 or 5 years, we started Bricks and Glitter to do the same thing. And Bricks and Glitter, again, is not us programming or us curating. We basically just reached out and put a call out to all of our community and, new community who are already doing something, and we just did an umbrella. So if you're already doing a burlesque show, if you're already doing a workshop, how can we come together under one festival and just highlight what people are already doing? And so this is our 3rd year of Bricks and Glitter. Also, I'm a bit disorganized because Bricks and Glitter technically starts like next week. So I'm a little bit like, what's happening?
So quick question. So Bricks and Glitter will now, since it starts next week, this is an online shift? It's online events now?
It's partially online. It's partially, there is some live stuff. but because of safety issues, we just want to be careful. And I think everything has just become online. And it's kind of like this was going to happen, it just happened faster. And for me, as much as I'm annoyed at being online all the time, from an accessibility framework, it's actually really good. Like if you can't leave your house, or if you're sick, or if something's going on, if you have kids, like it's actually a much accessible way. So our hope is that people will, if things open up again, people will integrate digital with live, so that people who might not be able to attend can actually attend. Yeah. And the things that we think about as artists, in terms of accessibility, and this is where I talk about inclusion, because in my background, my sister was quite sick growing up. My mother was sick while in her like late 50s. My father had dementia. I am MAD identified, so I had heavy depression for a really, really long time. And many people in QT BIPOC spaces, we all have a disability, or we're differently abled. Some of us deal with like substance abuse. The arts also is ridden with that. We weren't connected necessarily with deaf community. And so I started to meet people in the deaf community arts, and then recognized, oh, we're missing a piece. Like this isn't accessible for deaf folks. Or I have some friends who are in chairs, and I was like, oh, my friends can't come to these shows. So much of our practice is based on our own experience, versus like someone telling us like, you need to do X, Y, and Z, So does that register with folks, or like, yeah? And at some point, like we're all going to age, and so we are going to be facing disabilities in some framework. And so for me, it's really important that we not only change the way that we organize around community and art spaces, but society actually, our cities actually change the framework of how people can access spaces. Yeah. And even with working with deaf community, it took me a long time. Like we fucked up, we made mistakes, but we build relationships. So for me, I don't use the word networking, because for me, it's become this thing of just like, there's something about the word that I dislike. So we call it building relationships. And in order to do that, you have to build trust. In order to build trust, you have to listen, you have to take a step back. You have to actually actively create community without taking up a lot of space. And so these are the things that we've done for 25 years. And so we're like turtles, we're just slow turtles trying to embrace ourselves and the community around us. So that's kind of how we work as Unit 2, Bricks and Glitter, and also Law. Yeah? Any questions?
Do you offer an artist residency program as well at Unit 2?
We don't, but basically Unit 2 has become, the other piece about accessibility is financial accessibility. So Toronto in the 90s, which we came up in, was super affordable. Fast forward into like the late, I guess 2015 and on, you just saw prices skyrocket. So whether they're artistic spaces or living spaces, people were really struggling. So we may not do residencies, but we open it up for like rehearsals. If people need a space just to do a workshop. So we basically just get asked word of mouth to do many things. The hope one day would be, I think, I'm not really a future planner. We just kind of do stuff, and I'm not interested in being an ED or an AD, because I am a musician. So if we can, the next plan for Unit 2 is, can we move out, not live here? Can we figure out how to create a community center, basically art center, collectively, where people can, where we can raise enough money, because we actually have pretty good rent here. And the idea is that we can just share it as community. That's like the vision. Yeah. And we're getting there, but as musicians, we're also like, we might need to leave Canada because our music just tends to do better in Europe. And those walls that are still there for us. So we're hoping to pass it on to the new sort of generation of folks who might be interested in taking on. And that for me is like, if we do pass it on, and when we do pass it on, It's not about dictating to folks, this is what we did, so you must do this. It's about telling them that they can do what you want to do with this space, but please do it in the spirit of what Unit 2 was about, which is and inclusive means to me, like, it's not just about having everybody, all walks of life all the time. If you need a safer space for Black queer folks, if you need a space for deaf only folks, then that's what we're about, making space for everybody to have power over their own shit. Yeah? Yeah? And then I have a bunch of, I'm just looking at my notes. Part of, so the thing about affordability is that we've always made it a sliding scale. If there's an outside community who wants to have an event, we let them dictate the price, but we do say to them, hey, this is part of our policy. If that's something that you're open to, great. If not, no problem. Like, we don't at all control the space. I see a note there. Giving up control, giving up privilege, but that's what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll read it out loud so the others can.
Do you want to read it?
Maybe?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So Farah says, giving up control equals giving up privilege, but that's what we are trying to do in Symposium for those who are less represented than others of us. Inclusive also equals deeper and more profound, not just opening up to superficially include.
Exactly. And so part of even the piece around financial piece is we were losing money the first 8 years, but because we lived here, we could offset. And because LAL gets good grants, we basically used our grant money to fund Unit 2. Then we had a couple of folks come in, Daniel Mack, because we tried to make it very just BIPOC, or QT BIPOC. And then we realized that actually QT BIPOCs are stressed out. Many of our capacities were really low. So then my friend Daniel Mack, who's originally from the US and then moved to Montreal, got involved. He's a white queer cis man. And I realized that, it's not about excluding white folks, it's about how do we work together? Because if they're going to come for us, they're coming for all of us. You know what I mean? They're not going to so how do we actually work together? And then working with Daniel, who had and I'm not saying that his life isn't difficult and hard, but his capacity was much different. And he was able to put in some things that we just never had the time for. I also think sometimes a lot of us as racialized folks, our self-esteems aren't always that great. And sometimes we have a harder time just going to somewhere and being like, yes, we're going to do this, So it was me learning how to work with white folks in a way that I had never worked with, but also making it very clear that this was still a space for and by BIPOCs, but that we did want friends and allies, and I think that really did help transform Unit 2. And so our website was better. We had, it was just much more organized. So those are the things that we've been figuring out slowly as we've been running for a long time. Yeah. And then the thing about financial accessibility too is that if people didn't have the money to pay for a space, our rate, I think our community rate was $150. We actually started to make rates because then we realized, we actually should ask for a rate. And actually when we did ask, people actually did step up. I was quite shocked. Some people paid triple that rate. Some people paid below that rate. If they couldn't afford to pay whatever we were asking for, which is usually about $150 for 5 hours with sound and tech support and all those things, we would do a trade. So what kind of a trade can we do? And so for me, it's not just about money. It's about how can we actually use our other skills to support each other if we don't have the money. Yeah? Any questions?
Yeah, Farah has a suggestion for those of you with questions. You can offer a reaction so that way Rosina can see that you have a question and answer you in the chat. And I'll also be vigilant.
And do you want me, okay.
Please carry on.
Keep yapping?
Carry on. Any questions, anyone?
No
Please
questions.
Feel free. You can also unmute yourself since we're a small group. You can also unmute yourself and just speak out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question.
Sure.
It's him. I came in 2-3 minutes.
No, I was late too, don't worry.
I wish I'd been right there from the start. I'm like just glued to everything you're saying. I was just wondering, you talked earlier on about how, you kind of weren't able to really get a suitable, I don't know what to call it, an interface with like, the sort of dominant cultural establishments, and you weren't feeling that they were supporting you. So have you just kind of cut yourself off completely for them? Are they just out of your picture altogether?
So it's interesting because we belong, we're on a label called Coke's Records, which is Ray Spoon. I don't know if you've heard of Ray Spoon. They're a pretty prominent trans artist who, when they identified as trans, and they're public about this story, they did very well when they were quite young, and when they came out as trans, they were completely cut off from the mainstream. Yeah, and they didn't feel safe. So what they did was they just built their own career focusing on queer and trans folks. And then they started a record label called Cokes. So when we met them, which is about 10 years ago maybe, I was in that space because I'm a very friendly person, and I've worked in like the women's bookstore in Toronto. I worked at the biggest HMV. I volunteered for everybody. Like I'm pretty active in all kinds, from the activist scene to the arts. Cool. I had to make a decision because I just never felt comfortable in the mainstream art scene, And so for the first 10 years of Unit 2, I kind of just cut myself off. I was like, fuck the industry. I'm just going to cut myself off. Now, the last couple of years, what I'm realizing is that because we have myself, my partner, the people around us, because we have such good relationships with people, that we're actually a bridge. Because there are good people in the arts, just because just because there's toxic shit everywhere, it doesn't mean that there aren't beautiful and amazing people and organizations. So then we started to then become sort of, Unit 2 became this weird bridge. So now what I also now curate for Limonado Festival. Has anybody heard of Limonado Festival? So also like this weird festival that we were never able to get into. And then recently they've changed to sort of focus the power dynamic has changed a little bit. And they're really looking, and their funding has changed. So they're also looking to really embrace local talent. So for me to be an arts curator for Limonado, that's a great way that I can, get people paid, get people more experience out of just like DIY, depending on what people want. Because I think you may start wanting something, and then as you go through it, that might change.
Sure.
Yeah. So for me, I'm not interested in the industry anymore, because I do think there's still a lot of problems. But that doesn't mean I can't utilize the relationships and some of that knowledge, and then also a lot of those folks are turning to people like us because we actually do what we say we're going to do. Mm-hmm. Like we're not just like putting it up on a grant. We're not just putting it up to make it seem like we're this safer space, and the reason why I think partially why we're safer is because we're small. Mm-hmm. We have people actively walking the space or in the space to make sure that people are okay. With Bricks and Glitter, we were able to create a care team for the festival, and so then at each event that we had at Bricks and Glitter, when it was sort of like in person or like not online, we would have active listeners, we would have food, we'd have tokens. We really made an effort to make sure that people were safer. So and I don't think I've actually seen an active care team in Toronto at any of the festivals. So I think we were one of the first, if not the first, folks to actually create a care team for a festival. And that really changes the scope. It's a lot of work, but it's people who really are committed to that.
But that's very interesting because now that you've mentioned that, it's kind of, because some of the subject matter, for example, that I'm dealing with is potentially quite traumatizing. And then one's always sort of wondering, like, how do I support myself through this process? Exactly. And I imagine from what you're saying earlier on, some of the artists that you work with, or yourself even, you're kind of processing what you've experienced as you're creating. And so there will come moments when those artists really need to be kind of supported, like very carefully.
Exactly. And I think now because of this sort of national call for diversity, this national call for like being ethical, but also queer and trans positive, people are putting that out there in the world, but they're not backing it up with practice. And
Right.
that's very dangerous. Like, because for me, I was a basketball player, so I can step into any situation and pretend I'm on court, and I can get through it. But many of us can't,
That's
you
right.
know. And so, how are we holding, you know, if we're going to invite like a trans or two-spirit person to a festival, or you know, how are we holding them? You know, if we're going to invite Black folks to something, how are we holding them? So this was, because my partner is also Black, like it was very important for us to like figure out how to do this together collectively. It just takes longer. You know, and then we may not get the accolades that many Canadian musicians get, but we've created an ecosystem that we can continue to grow, you know, rebirth, die, whatever. Like we can just keep
Wow.
reimagining our own world. Yeah. So that's kind of how we work. Yeah. I'm just trying to see. And some of the tips that I've come up with, because we're so busy, I'm not able to always write down everything that we do. So much of my work and the way that I've learned is through my two-spirit and Indigenous community, Black community, queer community. Like it's the intersections of the community that we're a part of
Sure.
that has taught me, you know. And as a South Asian, I used to be very, I'm not saying we all do this, but I would have a very big opinion. I wouldn't listen, you know, and I had to really be like, no, you need to take a step back. You know, sometimes you don't have to talk all the time. I'm talking a lot right now. But like,
And you're here to do that.
yeah, I'm here to do that. Yeah. So I had to learn within my own body around and anti-Blackness for me is a continual struggle. Like we're in an anti-Black society, an anti-Indigenous society, anti-women, anti-trans. Like how do we live in those worlds, you know? So that's kind of how I have learned. You know, I was lucky to work in environments like the Women's Bookstore, so I had access to knowledge and I had access to books. But there's something happening in the world. Like we've had access to knowledge. We've had the books. We've had the academics. We've had the poets. Something, or the artists, like something's not clicking in our souls. So this is the work that we've been focusing on. Like actually how to transform our bodies to connect in with our minds.
Mhm.
Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that's the part that's very difficult to explain, because when there's an event at Unit 2, or even if I'm in a space, I'm energetically very much aware of what's happening in the space. And I think many of us have instincts that we either shut down or we don't know what to do with. You know, so for 25 years, I've just been honing in on my instinct, where now I have amazing ability to be able to clock something and say it without pissing people off, but you know, which is a skill.
And it's a great skill.
It's a great skill, especially when you're talking to also like folks in power.
Yes.
Because the dynamic of, and because we chose not to go part of the industry and create our own ecosystem, we're able to challenge people because we're not worried if they hire us or not. You know, like that doesn't impact us. And I think that's why people struggle in Toronto, because of that. If you piss somebody off, the worry is that you won't get hired. You know, and so because we've created our own bubble and we have such strong relationships, we don't have to worry about that. And actually,
Sure.
we do end up getting really good work just based on our reputation. Yeah, and I think sometimes like the hype, when you see bands or artists, when you see someone really hyped up, usually the faster you go up, the faster you go down. You know, or we're only there to see someone go up. Unit 2 and the work that we do, we're there when people come down. So we've housed people, like over COVID, we've housed like 3 or 4 mostly trans folks of color. We started a food program to help folks on the street. We've had to help folks, you know, through sobriety, you know, at our space, mental health stuff. So this is the work that people don't see and we don't talk about publicly, but it's necessary, because fame and corporate and capitalist culture always focuses on, oh, look how bright the star is. But
That's
what happens when a star, you know, is a dying sun. So what happens when that And so that's sort of the work that we do on the low, you know, because it can't just be about like wanting people who, you know, are famous, you know, or whatever, are known. It's about caring for everybody and understanding that we're all valued, that we all have value, you know? Yeah.
It's very inspiring, Rosina. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We have a couple more minutes left before we get cut off. If anyone has,
I'm so sorry I was so late.
No, it's perfect. Does anyone have any other questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself and speak.
And in the chat, I just put, ask the questions first and then I'll.
Actually, my question was very simple. Did you put in the chat all your contact links?
No, I put in the chat, and that's the other thing, because I don't have a contact list. Like I just my contact list. Okay. Oh yeah. That's what you meant. I don't even have a list.
Yeah, so in case people want to, people don't really phone me. I'm a little bit old. And I keep telling people, just phone me or just text me. Even better, just show up. Just come with a mask and I'll disinfect you when you come. But in case people want to get a hold of you, you can put your contact.
And I'll put in what I've added stuff into this, if people are interested, is like accessibility check. So if you're interested in looking at like how to be more accessible, hold on. There's a checklist that you can go through. And nobody's perfect, so it will take time to hit those things. And if you research it, there's a lot of, in the U.S. especially, there's a lot of work around that in crip communities, particularly around queer and trans communities. I also put in Dandelion Initiative. I think there's one there's a different group in Vancouver, but they're an organization that work with bars and organizations in Toronto to talk about gendered violence and safer training at events and bars, essentially. Factor, which I'm not always a fan of, they're a music organization that is funded, but they had a really good list